To quote Tom Petty, the Los Angeles Kings are free falling. A mess for the Kings as the All-Star break is here. We'll also talk about some first half surprises and our own Locked On NHL voting for the Norris Trophy. All on today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making the Locked On NHL podcast your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we will discuss the Los Angeles Kings, who are in the midst of a skid. Or is it a full-fledged trip? We'll discuss on today's show. We'll also take a look at some of the surprises of the first half of the season so far and our own voting for the Norris Trophy. We'll see who's on top for right away and some other players that could potentially close the gap. My name is Seth Toupal, one half of the dynamic duo for your Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. Nick Morgan, host of Locked On Predators, joining me today as well. Nick, not a good time to be the Los Angeles Kings, who, if you look at the standings, they are 2-5-3 in their last 10 games, but it feels like they have been substantially worse than that for a long time. And so just looking at what has led to them going from one of the top three in the Pacific Division to now being the top wild card for now. It's dicey for the Kings right now.
Yeah, 2 wins in the entire month of January, and they only have 1 game left. So yeah, for a team that kind of looked like a Stanley Cup contender about 30 days ago, Seth, it's a little bit jarring for the Kings fans. You know, we talked, I want to say last week when we were going through some Kings stuff, and, you know, it starts with Cam Talbot. Remember the reason the Kings fans were, you know, or Kings were so highly rated was because Cam Talbot kind of looked like a Vezina Trophy guy.
Yeah.
And we were going, oh, hey, remember when we sort of laughed at the Kings for going all in with Cam Talbot? Well, joke's on us. I'm happy to say the joke is no longer on us, Seth, because Cam Talbot, the nice way to say is he's fallen back to earth a little bit. You know, the stats are still decent, like 9-11 save percentage, 2.5 goals against average, but he was putting up like, you know, 930, 935, you know, not that long ago. So yeah, that tells you how far that percentage is dipped, kind of tells you how bad he's been.
You look at his numbers in January, 0-6-2 in the month of January with a 4.28 goals against average and 873 save percentage. He has given up 3 or more goals in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the 8 starts that he's made. And so not only that, but you got Drew Doughty calling out particular members of the Kings team, saying that there are players that are currently on that team that are stat chasing as opposed to trying to pick up wins.
And they're failing at it based on the stats.
It's gone south so quickly that they went from a team that was like squarely in the Western Conference playoff picture to now there are rumblings that Todd McLellan may not last the season and they may be sellers at the deadline. Like that's how quickly things have fallen that they're looking like a team that's not going to be trying to make additions at the trade deadline. And you look at some of the players that have just not lived up to what they need to be right now. How about Pierre-Luc Dubois with 20 points? 20 points in 47 games. He has 10 goals for a guy who they traded major assets for and then signs to a large extension. He has 3 goals and 3 assists in the entire month of January, but is a minus 12 in that span. And so just a guy that they need way more from, they're just not getting near enough from Pierre-Luc Dubois at this point in the season.
And look, I get that plus minus isn't the end all be all for great stats in this league, but you look at the rest of the Kings roster. Adrian Kempe plus 13, Anze Kopitar plus 14, Quentin Byfield plus 14, Drew Doughty plus 10. There's a lot of positive. Mikey Anderson plus 12. And, so everybody is, near plus. Some of the other ones are kind of right under. And then you look at Pierre-Luc Dubois, and he's minus 16.
Oh,
It's the lowest on the team. And it's, pretty jarring considering what the highest plus on the team is. I mean, that's a 30, like a 30 plus minus difference. And so, I mean, it is telling you that Pierre-Luc Dubois not necessarily kind of playing the brand of hockey that I think Kings fans expected him. We saw, a guy that had a lot of heart in Winnipeg, even if the stats weren't always there. He had the heart, in Columbus, he sort of built himself as, sort of that feisty guy that, he was the number 3 pick, but he was always willing to, kind of do the gritty work, fit in with that John Tortorella system. And we're not seeing it in LA this year. I mean, he's just not playing with any heart right now. And it's biting the Kings because when you look at the Winnipeg Jets for chance, the team he came from, and you look at Alex Iafallo, and you especially look at Gabe Vilardi, the 2 big pieces that the Jets, got for him, and they're doing really, really well in Winnipeg. So right now, I mean, if you're the Kings, Seth, is there buyer's remorse?
It certainly is looking like a deal that went south. I mean, it just like it's mind-boggling how quickly this flipped. And it's crazy too, because you look at the peripheral numbers in January, like their power play in the entire month of January, 26.8. That's pretty good. Their penalty kills at 88.1. And so it's not like they're losing. It's not like they're losing these games in, give up a power play goal here, or you can't score on the power play to get yourself back into it. Like the peripheral numbers are pretty good. They're just losing these games 3-0, 4-0, 5-1. Like it's like you throw a stick into somebody's bike spokes. It locks up and you go just full head over heels over the handle. It is a mess for the Kings right now. And what do you do to fix it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people, and, we called out Dubois, we called out, Talbot for, sort of being the crux of all this, but there's a lot of people that have taken a step back too. Adrian Kempe, remember he had 41 goals last year. The only 17 this year. So he's a little off the pace. Kevin Fiala is a little off the pace from where he was last year. Anze Kopitar, we always talked about like whether Kopitar like when that regression was going to kick in. And he had done very well the past few years to sort of fight that off. Still putting up good numbers, but it's not the 80-point guy from a few years ago. Like he's showing his age a little bit. He's not going to get back up there, so you can't rely on him anymore like you did the past couple of years. So it's obviously we called out a few people, Seth, but in the end, it's a team effort for the LA Kings, and there's going to needs to be some more people up and down this Kings roster that elevate their game if they want to get this back on track for the second half of the year. And it remains to be seen on whether they can.
Yeah, it is a team to watch for sure, because if they do decide that they're not going to be capable of getting into the postseason, they've got some pieces that I think would be very appealing for other playoff teams, like maybe the Vancouver Canucks, who continue to pace the Western Conference. We'll talk about them as we turn our attention to first half surprises, and there are certainly plenty good and bad. So we'll take a look at some of the surprises of the first half of the season as we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, folks. It's almost Nick's favorite time of year, Super Bowl Sunday. And for all of you who celebrate, FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, has got you covered for the big game. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your snacks, and placing some Super Bowl bets. Well, FanDuel has so many ways for you to do that, so you can end the season with a W, whether you're a fan of the Chiefs or 49ers or not. Not only can bet who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. And new customers, if you're listening, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Factor. If you are looking to get yourself in better shape or even eat better, Factor can help you take the stress out of meal planning with their ready-to-eat meals. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, Calorie Smart, Vegan Plus, Veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. Skip the overpriced takeout trap as well. Factor is cheaper and way more delicious than takeout. Get chef-crafted, restaurant-quality meals delivered right to your door. They're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, which means more time for you. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 and use code LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off. That's code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan turning our attention to first half surprises. I think there's one clear-cut biggest surprise of the first half, Nick, and that happens to be the team leading the entire Western Conference in points. How surprised are you, Nick, that the Vancouver Canucks continue to just chug away after many of the stats people on X, many of the stats people expecting them to have a drop off, and they just continue to win?
It's interesting calling the Canucks a surprise, and I'm not really sure I would, because how many times do we talk about, like, on paper, this should be a great team? Like, hey, They have Elias Pettersson. They have Quinn Hughes. They have Thatcher Demko. They have franchise players in every position. And the biggest surprise has just kind of been, why can't they just put it all together? I would say that's been more of the surprise. I think this is more of the Canucks finally meeting expectations. Because, I mean, let's be honest, a team with Elias Pettersson, who's been one of the best players in the entire NHL over the last 3 seasons, I think. Like that, the fact that they're good shouldn't be a surprise. Maybe the biggest surprise on the Canucks roster are the people that are kind of helping, the main core. Guess who leads the team in points right now, Seth? JT Miller. Remember him? Remember when it was like, wow, that was a bit that he signed that contract, and it's like, that's a big overpay for JT Miller. Guess who's leading the team in goals right now? Brock Besser. Remember when Brock Besser was sort of fell off after his rookie year and the Canucks were desperately trying to get rid of his contract? So to me, the biggest, I think, surprise in the Canucks success, it's not necessarily the fact that they're here on top of the standings at this point. It's how much high-end help they've gotten from other players on the roster besides Pettersson and Hughes.
Yeah, and you need to have that as a team that expects to go anywhere or to make any sort of playoff noise. Like, you need, obviously, your top-level guys to be top-level guys, but you also need key contributions up and down the roster, and Vancouver is just getting that and then some. So major props to Vancouver. You think about even as recently as a couple of years ago, what happened with Bruce Boudreau, how it looks like they were, in the midst of a rebuild. And they have gotten the steadying presence of Rick Tocchet, who has just continued to get the most out of that roster. And it is no coincidence that they currently are tied for the most points in the NHL with 71 with the Boston Bruins. What about the Winnipeg Jets? This may be more of a
There's your surprise.
This may be more of a contender for biggest surprise, a team that we talked about in the offseason as, are they going to blow things up? Like, are they going to take a step back and all of a sudden Connor Hellebuck and Mark Scheifele re-upped, and they have continued to be a team that's paced the Central Division. They've been in the top 3 all season. So let's give the crown then to the Winnipeg Jets for most biggest surprise of the first half.
Yeah, I can remember you and I talking and going, when that Dubois trade went down, we were like, all right, here's the Band-Aid. Hellebuck's in trade rumors. It's all going kind of downhill from here now for Jets fans. And instead, a lot of the people like Scheifele, like Hellebuck, that we're like, okay, they're, sort of in a weird spot. The Jets are going to have to kind of kick the tires to see what they got. They're the ones that have stepped up and are each having some of their best seasons right now. We talked about it in the last block, a lot of the guys that they got from the Kings, like Velarde, like Iafallo, have stepped into a role and have played really, really well for them. I am sad to report that they, I think, broke that massive streak they had of games with 3 goals or fewer allowed, because they allowed 4 in 2 games this past week, but they're still right there in terms of points percentage, the highest team in the Central right now. They're, I think, 3rd in the actual standings, but they have a couple games in hand on both Colorado and Dallas. I would say the Jets are the bigger surprise. And honestly, Seth, if they would have been like in a wild card spot right now, like kind of in that tier of teams, that would have been a bit of a surprise to me as well. So the fact that they're here where they're at, that's a massive surprise.
Yeah. Major ups to Rick Bowness, who continues to, I remember after last season when he was critical of his team's performance, and there were some thoughts on that shared on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. There were some thoughts shared that, maybe that's not the correct route to go, but he continues to be a really solid hire for the Jets, and he continues to get really good things out of that lineup.
Mm-hmm.
How about the other team? There's another one that I think is certainly worthy of consideration because they were written off after their slow start to the season and now just look like they may never lose again. The Edmonton Oilers, who have won, and this is not a typo, 16 games in a row. And now they sit in the third spot in the Pacific Division, 5 points clear of the Los Angeles Kings. And they've only played 45 games, Nick, and they have won 29 of them.
Which was pretty good considering they lost a lot of games at the beginning of the season. And the thing about the Oilers that's impressive, Seth, is it's easy to be like, Connor McDavid finally woke up and said, nah, screw this. I'm putting this team on my back. But hey, Stuart Skinner has played really, really well over the last little bit. That's a big reason. It feels like the Oilers are the type of team that's going to live and die by goaltending. We've talked about that before. Stuart Skinner has had a great last few weeks. And look, they had like the Jack Campbell debacle. Calvin Pickard came into the lineup, and I think everybody was like, great, Calvin Pickard, our season is saved. Hashtag sarcasm. Calvin Pickard's been great. One of the better backups in the NHL since he's been called into the lineup. So, for a team that kind of lives and dies by goaltending, that to me has almost been the bigger factor in the Oilers turning things around than Connor McDavid just kind of kicking into high gear. That is certainly a big factor. I mean, it's Connor McDavid. When he's hot, he's the best player in the league. But to me, goaltending is what's driving that turnaround right now.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny because the thought was just if the Oilers could simply get on track, like if they could just get both wheels back on the road. And they have, and look at them now, 16 wins in a row, and they are as big of a factor as any of the other teams in the Pacific Division because they've got 5 games in hand on the Vegas Golden Knights, and they're only 5 points back of them. So
looking good for Edmonton right now.
Yeah, I would say so. Now, from the other side of the coin, biggest surprises in terms of disappointments. I'm just going to throw out an honorable mention to the Seattle Kraken and the Minnesota Wild from a negative standpoint. Mm-hmm. Both teams at 21 and 28 right now. And I know people will say, well, 21, 23 and 5 is just a couple games below 500. No, it's not. It's 7 games below because overtime losses are just losses that take slightly longer, even though you get the pity point for them. So those are 2 teams, I think, from a negative side of things that have been surprises. Although, to be honest, I think this has just been lurking in the weeds for the Minnesota Wild for the last couple of seasons. Yeah. So maybe more so for Seattle, but
I would just to chime in real quick. I would say the way Seattle was built last year is you have to have it exactly right every year to replicate that success. So to me, not a huge surprise that they've taken a little bit of a step back.
Yeah, it's more so just kind of this is who they are if things don't go exactly according to plan. So those are the big surprises for the Western Conference so far this season. We'll finish by taking a look at the inaugural Norris Trophy voting as voted on by Locked On NHL hosts. That's on the way to finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive and well in the garage. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Final segment of today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Western Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan finishing things off by talking about the Norris Trophy, and much like we did last week, talking about the Hart Trophy race. We have voting that we do for all of the Locked On NHL hosts to try to get a sense as to kind of where some of these awards are at this point in the season. And actually what I'm going to do here, just for the sake of giving all of the viewers on YouTube an opportunity to see this, I'm just going to pop this in while we talk about the names that are currently in the top 10. But then, of course, I'll read them off for the audio listeners as well. But here's what we got for Norris Trophy at this current time. So Quinn Hughes leading the pack at number 1, followed by Cale Makar. Then you go to number 6, Miro Heiskanen. Then you've got Roman Josi. And you've got Evan Bouchard making up the and Josh Morrissey making up the Western Conference portion of the voting. And so let's just start with Quinn Hughes. Is that the right call, Nick? At least from our esteemed colleagues in terms of the Norris Trophy at this point in the season?
I think so. I mean, he's not only, I think, the best offensive defenseman in the league this year with the amount of points he's put up. I think he's 6th in the NHL in points right now. Because him, maybe 8th, because I know it's like him, Pedersen, and Miller are all in the top 10 for the NHL. Not only is he killing the offensive side, but defensively, he's been one of the best shutdown defenders in the NHL this year. It's almost like, you know, he kind of, the year he's having kind of reminds me of the year Makar had with Colorado a couple of years ago, where he had the 86 points, but was also really solid on the defensive end of the ice. And I think Quinn Hughes across the NHL is playing the best two-way defensive game this season. But you know what, Seth? I don't think Cale Makar this season is that far behind him either, because I think Cale Makar is having another really, really solid year. So yeah, they're 1-2. I think Hughes definitely has the edge, but I don't think he's not in like runaway territory.
Sure.
I think Makar is that close to him right now.
Yeah, and it's fun to have all of these. What's it like to be a team that has a young defenseman that can put up points and can also defend in pretty successful manners as well. It would be fun from a Minnesota. Oh wait, Minnesota Wild do have what looks to be a budding potential candidate for the Norris. I know he did not make the voting this time around, but Brock Faber, I think, is going to be a name that we hear in the voting in future seasons. Maybe a little premature this year, but just he does a lot of the same things that all of these players on this list do. Just once he adds some of the offensive side to it, because what do we know about the Norris Trophy voting?
They love them some offense.
They love those points. Love me some points. And so it's not a surprise that Quinn Hughes is leading the pack. I was a little surprised, I guess, at this point to see Roman Josi in 8th, but you may be more able to speak to why he should be higher. So I will give you the opportunity to do that.
Wait, you're asking me why he should be higher?
Or do you think he's in the right spot?
Look, I love Roman Josi, one of my favorite players, and I think he's having an okay year, but I'm not sure I'd put him higher than where he is right now. I think that's just the Nashville Predators being the Nashville Predators. I think the one person on this list that I would actually put higher is Josh Morrissey. That's the person on this list that I think is a little bit underrated. And I think you can also make a case for Miro Heiskanen being a little bit higher up this list as well. But yeah, I mean, Roman Josi, I think, is getting some name recognition votes. He's starting to turn it around offensively. And I do think his defense, it's been hit or miss, but it's been, I think the best defensively at points we've seen him this season. I just think there's more players in the Western Conference who I would put higher this season than Roman Josi. And look at my hat, Seth. Like, I love Roman Josi. Was the captain of the Nashville Predators. But I think there's other players in this list that deserve to be higher than him.
Very nice of you to throw consideration to John Merrill for the Norris. Very, very nice of you to do that.
Hey, Jacob Middleton too. Why not just throw him in there?
I'd put Middleton on this list over Johnny Vibes, but that's just me.
I would put me on this list higher than John Merrill.
Good point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the voting right now is pretty on par. It seems like it's Hughes and Makar at the very defined top. And then there's just a little bit of space. All I know about Noah Dobson on the Eastern Conference side is that he plays a ton of minutes a night and obviously is a very good defenseman. But I think he is, and the rest of the pack, I think are a little step below what Hughes and Makar have done so far this year. So
yeah,
we'll have updates on that. I would imagine we'll get a Vezina voting update here pretty soon. So maybe we talk about that next week. We'll also keep an eye on the All-Star game and see if anything of note happens there. Maybe the Western Conference or one of the teams for the West wins it. We'll find out. Maybe it's not even watchable. Time will tell. There are endless possibilities for the All-Star game. And so we'll keep an eye on those. So make sure that you keep an eye on Locked On NHL and make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms as well as on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.